Live from Studio 67 in Florida's Capital County, it's time to get fact-checked.
Access granted.
Good people of Florida, happy Friday and welcome back to another episode of Fact Check. It is week 8 of the legislative session out of God knows how many. Quick roll call. Courtney, you here with us today?
I'm here.
Peter, how about you? What's going on, man?
I'm still standing.
And then we are joined by a very special guest today, none other than the head of the Small County Coalition himself, the harbor captain, Mr. Christian Doolin. Chris, what's going on? Thanks for joining us today.
Well, thank you very much. There's a lot going on, but, end of the session, and there's some, end of session activity with kind of not necessarily a Mexican standoff yet or a standoff, but people have certainly, they're driving their points home. The bigger picture is that they're not going to finish on time.
Well, and I think to be a standoff, both chambers would have to be here, and the Senate just went home, everybody.
Well, that's true. The standoff really was, you could tell it coming early in the session because they have very different views of tax reform.
Sure.
Okay. And they have very different priorities. Principally, the standoff is on tax reform.
Right.
The House wants to roll back, the sales tax, about $5 billion. The Senate wants to take a more deliberative approach and evaluate property tax and where they can do that in some kind of a sustainable way, and they're going to study that. They want to study that. We haven't seen any major tax revision on property tax come out of the Senate. They tapped the brakes on that. So until they figure that out, they don't know how much money they have to spend.
Right.
And then you move to the budget. And so they're not proceeding in conference this weekend. In prior sessions, we would be running up and back and forth with conference going on. That's not happening.
And I think the expectation is that we see kind of a cooling off period and then they reconvene in a couple weeks.
Well, I don't know. Obviously, there's a lot of policy legislation on the table, and there's a lot of work that can be done. It all depends how dug in the Senate president or the speaker is in terms of whether or not they're going to hold back and not take up things, or we're going to jam it across the aisle and see what happens. So ultimately, they're going. Once they get a budget done, they whether they do that before Friday. If it adjourns Friday and they haven't finished, then do they extend the session and keep everything alive, or do they pull
the plug?
Pull the plug and start over, and then you have to figure out what's going on with the bills that are still in play. So it's a little confusing right now. My sense of it is this: everybody needs to just look at the moving parts. There's a lot of ships in the harbor, and they all want to come into port, and we've put a little bit of pause on anybody landing right now.
Words of wisdom from the harbor captain.
Yeah.
And Chris, this is not your first rodeo. Have you seen friction like this before between the two chambers?
Well, every session has its own identity. Every session has its own dynamics, whether they're external or internal. But I would have to say this session has some extra dynamic going on. Specifically, with started off with immigration reform,
right?
And everybody wanted to get immigration reform, but
word to Amir Warren.
They had different philosophies about going forward, and they got a little bit. I say a little acrimonious. I've never seen language exchanged in writing, in memos, in press releases, and in public comment. So it's a little extreme. I think that the leadership, Perez. I like Danny Perez. Danny Perez is a sharp. He's very convicted in terms of his principles.
Principled guy.
He wants to reduce spending. He wants a lower budget. Ben Albritton is a lot of expertise. He's been in the process for 14 or maybe, I don't know, probably maybe 14 years now. And he's I don't want to misrepresent that he's laid back, but he's very deliberative, and he's very Let's take a look at everything and let's see how things go. So I think the two of them have complemented each other, their personalities. Now, it may not seem like that based on what happened yesterday when they all pulled the plug on conversations over tax reform and the budget, and then you got the governor. I mean, the governor clearly has some.
That's the wild card in all this.
Well, I think right now I know you got to pay attention to the governor in the legislative process, but I think at this stage of the game we need to see the House and the Senate work and to see what they want. Right. Because the governor has been way above the radar on criticizing the House, and that's we'll just have to. He'll make his play after it's all over with the veto, and then we'll see what happens.
Well, and I think they're mentally budgeting some time to respond to that down the road potentially.
Well, you mean with the special session, or what are you talking about? Yeah. Well, they'll deal with it
dealing with vetoes as
appropriate. As appropriate.
And Chris.
You spoke a little bit to Speaker Perez's priorities. Now, Senate President Albritton's priority from the very beginning, his legacy project, has been the rural renaissance. I know this is an issue that's near and dear to your own heart, and there's been a lot of moving parts here. You want to talk to us a little bit about kind of what's going on with that bill and where it finds itself with a week to go?
Well, we all know why the president is targeting rural renaissance. He grew up, he's a farmer, he's out of Wauchula, he understands small counties. And for about 2 months prior to the session, he tasked the policy staff in the Senate, committee staff and others, to come up with a variety of ways that we could enhance and move areas in impact in rural counties. And he termed the coin of rural renaissance. So they created a bill. It has economic development. It has road. It has health care. It has education. It has a lot of stuff in fiscally constrained with county funding. So he put that out there, and they moved it through the Senate pretty quickly.
Got fast-tracked. Took about a matter of weeks.
Well, it's and if you calculate the cost, it's about a $200 million package. I kind of wondered how we were going to process this thing as a separate bill because it wasn't reflected in the budget. And lo and behold, the House figured out how they were going to process it. They divided it up. The provisions of health care in one bill and education in the other, and all the economic development and other stuff in bills. And I think there's two reasons for that. One is they wanted to get a better handle on looking at things, but I think the principal reason is that they wanted to put good stuff that Senator Albritton wanted on some of their good stuff that maybe the Senate didn't want.
Yeah, put pressure on it.
Well,
Use it as a bargaining
chip. Package it up and bargain. So with that, now every component of the president's rural renaissance, and there are about 55 different positions, they are all reflected. Nothing got dropped in the House.
It's just split across 3 bills at this point.
Yes, and people know where it all is.
Yep.
And, even though I personally might not have supported some of the stuff in those other bills.
Right.
I felt it was necessary, as did to support having that put into those bills so that we could keep that language alive.
Yep.
And then now we've got another day, and we'll see what happens when it goes over to the Senate.
Well, and just kind of building off what you were talking about, the meat of the economic development portions of that rural renaissance bill ended up in House Bill 991,
right?
Which started off as a freeze on CRAs, community redevelopment agencies,
right,
and has really turned into an all-you-can-eat buffet. We have added about 500 pages, I wish I was kidding, including the rural renaissance language, as well as what's kind of colloquially being called the DREG package. What we're seeing there is kind of the consolidation of a number of professional and tradesman licensing boards into DBPR's umbrella, as well as kind of stripping a lot of the continuing education requirements away. So really kind of deregulating a lot of these trades professions. And this is just a philosophical centerpiece of, I think, the Speaker's office, what he wants to see. And so this definitely was a strategic move, hitching his wagon to the rural renaissance, knowing that the Speaker or that the Senate President is going to do everything in his power to get that across the line. With that being said, we are still, a week to go. Regular committees have just about wrapped up, barring any unforeseen circumstances. So, the team was on the 4th floor of the Capitol for about 12 plus hours a day this week. And, at this stage of the game, I think the clock is ticking on a lot of these bills. And so, with each kind of successive day, if a bill's not being heard or it's being TP'd, I think that's kind of an existential threat to it ultimately passing. I know we saw that with a bill we've been tracking for a while now. Courtney, you want to talk to us a little bit about what happened with Senate Bill 1080 on the floor this week?
So Senate Bill 1080 started off as comprehensive planning reform bill that kind of turned into another one of these packages after the death of 1118, which was ag enclaves. A lot of that language ended up in Senate Bill 1080 along with the impact fee language, because the impact fee standalone bill also died. And on the floor on Wednesday, we saw something that we haven't seen in a while, which was this bill died. And to the shock of all of us, it died. It did have a few amendments that did get adopted. The impact fee language did show up on here at that point. The stripping of the agricultural enclave language was also an amendment that passed. And then 18 to 19.
Yeah, and to Courtney's point, I think the conventional wisdom is that if a bill does not have the votes, it's simply not going to get heard. You'll see it TP'd more often than not. And so to see a bill just fail to pass outright is kind of a rarity. That agricultural enclave language, if I recall, it was kind of problematic early on. This is already in statute where under certain conditions you can kind of develop these greenbelt lands, and this would have kind of lowered the threshold to do so, broke down some of those barriers to developing on these islands of agricultural lands.
And as we did see it die, after going over the rules with everyone, only a member who voted down on the bill can bring up a point of order for it to be voted on again. So on Thursday, Senator Pizzo asked that it be reconsidered, and it has since been TP'd and should be on the calendar on Monday for the Senate. So we will see it back up again. We have no clue what it's even going to look like.
Right. So
we
safe
don't
to
know.
Say it's dead for now.
It's dead for now, but it is calendared for Monday.
That nothing's truly ever dead.
Yes, nothing's truly ever dead until sine die, and then that's also up for debate if they call a special session.
Appreciate that update, Courtney. I know the land development trend has been heavy this session, and one of the bills I've been tracking recently that was a simple mitigation banking bill had a title change recently to land development.
Yeah, now I've had to learn about mitigation banks.
And the bill itself got TP'd. Again, this was the mitigation banking bill that would have allowed for mitigation of off-site impacts, and I think kind of the concern was that developers were going to be able to mitigate the impacts of their development potentially in high growth areas of South Florida up in the Panhandle. Mm-hmm. And I think the philosophy of no net loss within the watershed was keep it as close to the original service area as possible. And so, if developers can now take the path of least resistance and develop or mitigate their impacts anywhere, where does it end? You kind of got to draw a line in the sand somewhere. Again, this bill was TP'd, but just kind of the curious thing with that amendment was that it did get that title change to land development, and so we are keeping a close eye on that one to make sure it does not grow into something more sinister down the stretch here.
One other bill I did want to talk about is the affordable housing bill. 943 was heard in its last committee earlier this week. Representative Lopez has come a far way from her original bill that was 63 pages long. I think we're down to about 20 now. She has moved a lot closer to the Senate bill. There are two heavy sticking points within this. She added language centered around golf courses and pools now being able to have affordable housing dwellings built on them. So that portion we are not very happy with. But in the back half of the bill, there's an even bigger portion that waives our sovereign immunity, which we're not too keen on. This would make it so any developer could sue local government for discrimination under the Fair Housing Act and get the actual damages. So part of the bill has attorney's fees and costs in it, and then the back half of the bill has this waiving of sovereign immunity. We are working to try to get that out. Currently, Senate Bill 1730 does not have that language, and we're hoping it does stay out. I mean, they've been in negotiation the entire session about affordable housing, and the Senate didn't take this language up to begin with. So I'm hoping that they don't take it.
And looking back a couple years, Courtney, the preemption to end all preemptions has not quite come to
what
fruition.
was that? What was that bill again? Does anybody remember?
It seems like, in spite of that, we see more and more causes of action popping up, kind of opening the door for litigation.
More causes
against
of
our local
action,
governments,
more
so.
preemption. It's never going to end. We shouldn't have believed them.
Well, Peter, how about you? I know you were tracking a big one that we've been, working with stakeholders for a few weeks now on. What's the latest with utility relocation?
Well, as you folks know, we have come a long way from when this bill was filed. The counties and the cities were 100% on the hook for utility relocation of these communication service providers. First, it was broadband, video, and cable. Then the universe was widened a little bit to communication service providers. We have been having very constructive discussions, with Senator McClain and Representative Will Robinson that culminated in establishing a utility reimbursement grant program within the Department of Commerce that would have $50 million.
Out of the goodness of our heart.
Correct. Correct. Now, our goal was to limit the liability, to counties and to cities practically as much as we could.
Right. The bill as filed, our exposure on that was
astronomical.
Yeah,
exactly. So. This was a project by project case where, it could have gone into the hundreds of millions of dollars. And, the folks at the cities and us at the counties decided that, we would like to negotiate, and we stood at $50 million to be remitted from the Department of Revenue that administers, the state communication service tax. And, this would be given to the Department of Commerce, where now utilities will be able to apply with, proper documentation and jumping through the hoops to get reimbursed when a county or municipal authority, and the state as well, although the state section is a little bit different, which is a project by project scenario, to get reimbursed for these relocation costs. There was conversations, from the CSPs that were saying that they, remit the CST that us, the consumers, pay for, and when we're buying these products, and the counties and the cities weren't using that CST for relocation. We cleared up that CST was intended for permitting, that CST was not a slush fund. Many small counties, as Chris can attest to, weren't even reaching 6 figures in CST revenues. So we spent a couple weekends, hashing it out with both bill sponsors and the communication service providers involved, as well as the cities, and we all agreed that $50 million was the right number to fund these relocations.
Sure.
And we also cleared up that once this pot of money does run out, we made it clear that the authority, in the case of us, the counties, would not have to fork out the money to relocate these utilities.
So the cost would fall to them once the bucket
correct.
Of money is empty.
So not only did we limit our liability to $50 million, we limited it to perhaps it being interpreted in a way where we would have to replenish that fund. So
it's in there. It's in the language.
It's twice. In there twice.
It is about as unambiguous as it gets.
Correct, Jared.
But Peter, I think what this really shows is that we want to be good partners to the ISPs in our community that are delivering broadband.
We want good relationships,
services. Right. We want good customer service relationships. But kind of the appeal of this language for us was that it did kind of cap our liability at that $50 million threshold.
Correct. And I know I'm using Robinson again, but this time it was Rep. Felicia Robinson. Throughout the process was a strong no. Was
she
one
was
of our
sole no
was
there, right?
On the House side, Senator Davis on the on the Senate side. And she said it on the House floor today that she was no throughout all the stops that she saw it in committee. And because she recognized Will Robinson's, Rep. Robinson's wanting to bring all the stakeholders to the table, she was up today. That passed 106, I believe, on the House floor. And so did Rep. Honchosfi. She thanked the bill sponsor for, really making sure that everybody is somewhat has a, how did she say it? Everybody was on the line. Everybody had skin in the game with regards to these costs. So, yeah.
That was an interesting bill when you step back and analyze it from a public policy or a political science scenario, whether or not someone in the right-of-way, you got at least three other, in the right-of-way, you got water, you got gas lines, you got electrical lines, and along come the ISPs, and they want to get paid for when everybody else is having to pay.
Right.
So, I mean, the fairness issue of that. And then when I talk about the political science of it, policy sometimes doesn't finish first to politics. And these companies, we all work with them very well. I mean, it's no problem, but they're making huge profits. And, we pointed that out at one point that, they got hundreds of millions of dollars in grant money to deploy. And now they want to get the public sector to pay for moving them, and
special treatment there too.
All I'm saying is get ready, because if I were a gas company or a water company, and they're coming.
The slippery the genie's out of the bottle here.
They're coming. So,
which was the biggest fear that we had with this bill is who's next?
Is that everyone would want to latch on.
Who is going to come ask us for money next?
Wouldn't you?
Yeah. But I think that FAC. First of all, you're right. Robinson and McLean were very good members to work with.
Correct.
And I'm not saying they were uncomfortable with the bill itself, but they knew that what was being proposed was a little bit so. But the ISPs are good friends of legislators.
Yep.
And all we provide is information. We'll end it with that. I mean, it's all we know what we're up against.
Well, I'm glad we landed in a place that, kind of respected the local revenue authorities. We were not so lucky on a pair of bills in the House this week on the floor. And these are from Jeff Silo. I'd be remiss if I did not cover his bases on his behalf while he's out there working right now. But House Bill 1221 by Representative Miller and then the tax package, House Bill 7033, both have a provision that is co-opting tourist development taxes for the purpose of offsetting property taxes. And again, this has been kind of a philosophical priority, from the fourth floor, from the very beginning. They've been looking for kind of a way in, and I think they found it here, their foothold. So specifically what we're looking at is any let me take a step back. Any tourist development councils, I believe, are immediately sunset, and then any TDT revenues that are not pledged for, not bonded or pledged for debt service at this moment are to be credited against the county's property tax bill. And so, I think it goes without saying how important tourism is to our state, is to our local communities, and so to be, threatening to compromise that revenue is just potentially catastrophic. And not only that, but it feels like kind of this vicious cycle, whereas you threaten, tourist development taxes, you're going to get less tourist development tax revenues, and it's just going to be a feedback loop from there. So, this is one that we have been sounding the alarms on to our local delegations to call their members. And the vote today in the House on House Bill 1221, the standalone, was 62 to 45. So, I think the red flags are starting to rise here. But, we just need to make sure that down the stretch we make sure it stays out of any Senate language.
Well, there's a term in agriculture that you eat your seed corn, you don't get the crop. And with this,
you want to walk me through that one?
Yeah, I will. So you got a scenario where tourism generates a dollar bill, and then invested back in tourism and promotion, and you generate
more and more.
Yeah. So what they're doing here is they're turning over the TDT money to the counties and making us reduce our ad valorem, thinking that all they're doing is a sleight of hand. Well, that's not the case, because the counties are strapped.
Yep.
They have their expenses, and they didn't take it into consideration. They always took into consideration that they had this other pot of money, and now they don't. So
you're kneecapping both sources with one fell swoop.
So my reference to seed corn is that's seed corn that's going to develop more crops.
Yep.
So they're eating the seed corn, and it's there you go.
Well, Chris, you got quite a way with words. We might need to make this a permanent fixture on the podcast team here.
It's up to you.
There's a seat with your name on it, man. Whenever you want to join. But with that being said, any last-minute housekeeping items, things we saw on the floor this week, any landscape issues from the legislature right now?
Well, I think there's a lot that's going to be played out that we don't know how it's going to be played out, but there's a lot that's already been played that we know how it's going to end, and there are some major wins this year. Term limits, that's been hung up in the Senate. Again, nothing's dead till it's over, but the term limit issue is resolved. Sovereign immunity was resolved. That would have been expensive for counties with increased caps. There was a proposal to eliminate the regional planning councils. That now has been dished aside. It's depending on the leadership in your council and what kind of services you're getting. But by and large, we were supportive of that. So there's a lot still out there. I mean, there's things other than with the counties. I mean, the school start time repeal. I mean, 2 years ago they mandated that every school has to start. You couldn't start before 8:30 if you were high school, and that's sitting on the House floor. It has yet to be put on special order, but that's a major priority of everybody. Yep. And so that kind of stuff we're waiting to see what happens, and it could fall through the crack. I'm not saying it will, but it could fall through the crack. That's about all I have.
Yep.
Well, nicely said, Chris. Again, really appreciate you joining us today. I love the team I got here, and I like us down the stretch here, so we'll just have to see how some of this stuff plays out. But Courtney, Peter, how about you guys? Anything else y'all want to leave us with?
I'm good. Just waiting for next week.
Oh,
Waiting
yeah.
for that light at the end of the tunnel.
We'll have quite the podcast next week, I'm sure of that.
Actually, that reminds me, typically we do not do a Signy Die podcast. We save it up for the post-session webinar.
Okay.
So just did want to make everybody aware of that.
So this is our last one.
Well, that's because y'all are going to be out drinking, celebrating.
Yeah,
You don't want to come in here with a podcast.
By this time next week, I'll have a pina colada in my hands.
Okay.
On a beach
Or
somewhere?
On a beach,
or
maybe?
a stiff glass of bourbon.
Yeah, probably the stiff
yeah,
glass
probably
of
the latter.
bourbon.
I trust this gets edited out, right?
Right.
We'll see.
All right.
Well, thank you guys for listening as always, and we will see you on the other side.
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Goodbye.